The Arizona sun burned white and fierce across the plains that day, a cruel, relentless eye that spared no man, woman, or beast. Wind carried the taste of dust and distance, whispering through the sagebrush like the ghost of something ancient. From the far trail, a single stagecoach rumbled forward, wheels creaking, horses sweating, the driver cursing under his breath. Inside that worn carriage sat Clara Beaumont, a woman no longer young but not yet old, her beauty softened and scarred by hardship. Her bonnet was faded, her gloves torn at the seams. 4 children dozed beside her, the youngest clinging to her skirts, the eldest watching the horizon with hollow eyes that had seen too much for a boy of 12. Clara had once known comfort. White curtains, a small garden, a husband who promised her the world when they were young and foolish. But the railroad had taken him in a blast of fire and iron, and with him went every coin, every plan, every ounce of certainty. When the men from the company told her she'd get nothing but sympathy, she'd nodded, dry-eyed, and walked away before they could see her crumble. Now she was bound west, chasing a rumor, a letter from a friend of a friend who said there was work at a frontier post near the San Carlos River. Housekeeping, they said. Meals, a roof, maybe safety. That was enough for her. But when the coach finally rattled down from the ridge and stopped, there was nothing there. No post, no soldiers, no buildings. Just the remains of a burned ranch, a half-broken fence, and a sign nailed to a blackened beam that read, "Abandoned by order of the Territorial Army." The driver spat into the dust and climbed down. "This here's the end of the line, ma'am." Clara stepped out, holding her youngest by the hand. Her boots sank into the sand. "There must be a mistake," she said weakly. "I was told—" He cut her off with a shrug. "Ain't no mistake. Army pulled out 2 months back. Bandits got the rest. You can head north maybe, but that's 60 miles without water. Coach don't turn around till next month." And with that, he flicked the reins and the coach rolled away in a swirl of dust, leaving her standing alone with 4 children and the wind. For a long time, Clara just stared at the empty plain. The baby whimpered. The oldest, Samuel, kicked a rock and muttered, "What now, Ma?" She didn't know. God help her, she didn't know. Hours passed. The sun sank lower, turning the sky the color of copper and blood. Clara gathered her children near the remains of a wall and tried to start a fire. Her hands shook as she struck flint against stone. Each spark seemed to die quicker than hope. Then she heard it, a distant rhythm, steady and deep. Hoofbeats. Fear struck her first. Outlaws, maybe. Drunk soldiers, or worse. She rose, clutching the small knife her late husband once carried. Her heart hammered as the sound grew nearer. From the horizon came a horse and rider, a lone figure, tall and silent, riding with a grace that seemed carved from the earth itself. The horse was a paint, dust-caked and lean. The man atop it wore buckskin, his hair long and braided with a single eagle feather, an Apache. Clara froze. Every tale she'd ever heard flashing through her mind. Savages, raiders, killers. She pulled her children close. The rider dismounted slowly, his movements calm, almost reverent. His eyes, dark as obsidian, took in the woman and her children. When he spoke, his voice was low, smooth as riverstone. "You've lost your way." Claire's throat was dry. "We were supposed to find a post here, soldiers' work." He glanced around the charred ruins. "Soldiers gone. Only ghosts now." She nodded, her voice breaking. "Then we're stranded." He looked at her children, thin, tired, covered in trail dust. His gaze softened. "You have little ones. They need shade, food, water." Her chin lifted slightly. "We'll manage. You will not." He said it not as an insult, but as truth. "Come. There is a canyon not far. Water there. Shelter." Clara hesitated, her mind a storm of fear and pride. But the baby's lips were cracked and Samuel was swaying on his feet. The desert was not a place for defiance, she nodded. "If you mean no harm, we'll go." The Apache inclined his head once. "I am Greyhawk. Harm is not my way." He mounted again, then reached down a hand to her eldest son. "He can ride. The rest will walk with you." Clara and her children followed the warrior into the desert twilight. The land seemed to shift as they went, red rock rising like cathedral walls, the air cooling as the canyon swallowed the heat. By the time stars appeared, they reached a hidden hollow, a pool fed by a trickle of spring water, trees whispering overhead. Greyhawk built a fire from dry mesquite and motioned for the children to sit. From his saddlebag he drew strips of dried meat and offered them silently. Clara accepted, tears stinging her eyes as her children ate. "Thank you," she murmured. Greyhawk nodded. "No need, you are people. People help people." She watched him in the flickering firelight, his sharp features, the calm strength in his movements. He seemed part of the land itself, untamed and yet deeply human. When her children finally slept, she found herself speaking softly. "I didn't mean to bring them here. I thought I was doing right. I just wanted a place where we'd be safe." Greyhawk's gaze met hers. "Safe is not in places. Safe is in people who stand with you." Clara blinked, surprised by the weight of his words. No preacher back east had ever spoken so plain, so true. Silence settled between them, filled with the murmur of water and wind. After a while, she asked quietly, "Why are you helping us?" He stirred the fire. "Long ago, my mother helped a white woman who had lost her way. She said kindness is like fire, it spreads or it dies. I do not let it die." Clara turned her face toward the flames, hiding the tears that came unbidden. That night, beneath a sky thick with stars, she lay with her children close, the scent of smoke in her hair. For the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. When dawn broke, she awoke to the sound of Greyhawk sharpening a blade by the stream. The sunlight touched his hair, his shoulders, the quiet lines of his face. He looked toward her and gave a slight nod. "Today," he said, "we make a home for now," and in that moment, something deep in Clara's chest stirred, a small, fragile warmth that she hadn't felt since her husband's death. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of belonging. The desert had taken everything from her, but in the heart of its harsh beauty, she had found something the world had long denied her: mercy. And the man who'd given it was the last person she'd ever expected. The canyon opened before them like a secret the earth had been hiding for centuries. Its walls rose high, red and streaked with ochre, casting long shadows that danced in the morning sun. Greyhawk led Clara and her children into its embrace, moving with the ease of a man who knew every stone and whisper of the land. He paused occasionally, turning back to make sure the children were keeping up, and Clara noticed how his eyes softened whenever they fell on them. "This place," he said quietly, "is called Red Hollow. Few come here and fewer stay." Clara breathed in the cool air, smelling the faint sweetness of cottonwood leaves and the crisp scent of the spring water trickling through the rocks. She let her children scatter, gathering sticks for a fire, poking at shallow pools of clear water, and chasing lizards that darted like living sparks across the sand. Greyhawk bent over a flat stone, drawing lines with his finger in the dust. "We need shelter," he explained. "Walls of rock will protect us from wind. Fire keeps predators away. You will cook and care for children, yes?" Clara nodded. Though she had been wary at first, his words carried no menace. His calm authority made it clear that resistance would be useless, but also perhaps that it was unnecessary. For the first time in weeks, she felt a hint of relief threading through her nerves. The children followed Greyhawk's instructions eagerly. Samuel learned how to collect water in a hollowed stone. Emily, the second oldest, helped her mother gather sticks for kindling. And little Anna clung to Clara's skirts while watching Greyhawk fashion a crude but effective shelter from fallen branches and rocks. At night, they all gathered around the fire. Greyhawk cooked simple food, dried meat and roasted roots, and offered it silently. Clara watched as her children devoured the meal, their laughter ringing out into the canyon like bells. She realized with a pang that she had forgotten what it felt like to see them truly happy. The shadows of hunger, fear, and exhaustion had long since dulled their eyes. But here, in this hidden canyon, the light returned. Greyhawk sat opposite her, his face half lit by the fire. "You are strong," he said, almost as an observation, not a compliment. "Not all women can endure what you have." Clara's lips twitched in a faint smile. "I had no choice. Strength is all I know." He nodded, his dark eyes steady. "Strength is good, but it is not everything. Sometimes one must trust others to share it." She looked down at the fire, not certain how to answer. Trust had been in short supply her entire life. Every man she had loved, her husband included, had left a mark of broken promises, and yet there was something in Greyhawk, something steady and quiet, that made her wonder if trust could be reclaimed. Days passed. The children began to explore the canyon under Greyhawk's watchful eye. He taught them how to find edible plants, how to avoid snakes, how to fashion small traps for rabbits. Samuel grew bold, following the Apache through narrow rock passages, asking questions about the land, the animals, and even about Greyhawk himself. "Why do you live out here alone?" Samuel asked one morning, kicking a pebble into the stream. Greyhawk's jaw tightened. "Some men have no home in towns," he said. "Some are too free for walls." Samuel considered this. "But you can make a home," he said. "With us." Clara glanced at Greyhawk, surprised by her son's audacity. For a moment she thought Greyhawk might be offended. Instead, he just gave a small, slow smile that softened the hard lines of his face. "You are brave," he said. "Perhaps more than your mother knows." Clara's heart ached with a strange warmth. She realized she had been watching him too, watching his movements, his quiet attentiveness, the way he cared for her children as if they were his own. And she had been feeling something she hadn't allowed herself in years. The stirrings of trust, of attachment, perhaps even attraction. One evening, as the canyon was bathed in a golden sunset, Clara approached him while he was sharpening a knife by the fire. "I should thank you," she said softly, "for leading us here, for keeping us safe. I don't know how I could repay you." Greyhawk glanced up, his expression unreadable in the dying light. "No repayment is needed," he said. "But you must take care of your children. That is repayment enough." Clara looked down, tugging at her gloves. "I've never asked for help. I've never let anyone in like this before, and now I feel as if I owe you everything." He gave her a long, measured look as if weighing his words. Then he simply said, "Then do not owe me. Let us just live." And in those simple words, Clara felt the first flicker of something dangerous and wonderful. Hope. The children's laughter echoed through the canyon, chasing away shadows of fear. The smallest, Anna, climbed onto Greyhawk's knee, reaching for a piece of jerky. He handed it to her, smiling, and Clara felt her chest tighten. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that this man, wild and steadfast, was becoming the anchor in a world that had offered her nothing but storms. Then came the confession that would change everything. One morning, as they gathered berries by the stream, Clara paused. Her hands trembled slightly as she brushed a strand of hair from Emily's face. She swallowed hard, the words heavy on her tongue. "I've got 4 kids, sir," she said, her voice low and trembling with shame. Greyhawk looked at her. The sunlight glinted off his braids and he studied her, then the children, then back at her again. And then slowly, a grin spread across his face. A wide, warm human grin that seemed to push the desert shadows back. "Good," he said, his voice steady, a note of laughter hidden beneath. "I've got room for 8. Clara blinked, startled by the levity in his tone. She had expected shock, disapproval, maybe pity. Instead, she found relief and even laughter. The children giggled at his grin, and for the first time the canyon felt like a real home. Weeks turned into months. The canyon provided them with water, shelter, and food, but more importantly, it gave Clara a rhythm, a stability she had not known for years. Greyhawk's presence was constant but never overbearing. He taught her children, protected them, and even began to help Clara see herself not merely as a survivor, but as a woman capable of care, courage, and love. By the time spring arrived, the desert seemed less harsh. Wildflowers burst from cracks in the red rock. Birds sang through the cottonwoods. Clara's children ran and laughed with abandon, their hair sun-streaked and their cheeks flushed with health. And every night when the fire dimmed and they all settled down to sleep, Clara would look at Greyhawk sitting silently beside her and feel something she had thought lost forever: peace. In Red Hollow Canyon, a widow and her 4 children had found a sanctuary. And in Greyhawk they had found something deeper, a man whose heart had room enough to shelter more than just himself. That was when Clara realized, truly, that the beginning of their story, their strange, improbable family, was only just beginning. The canyon had given them safety, the land had taught them survival, and Greyhawk had opened the door to a life Clara had never imagined could exist, one filled with trust, laughter, and the possibility of love. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between the rustle of leaves and the murmuring water, Clara dared to imagine a future where her children would grow up not in fear, but in hope, and perhaps, she thought with a small, daring smile, alongside the man who had welcomed them all so easily into his world. The first hints of trouble came on the wind, dry and sharp. carrying the scent of smoke and horses. Greyhawk had warned them that life in the canyon, though safe, could not exist in isolation forever. The Arizona Territory was a land of shifting alliances, half-forgotten grudges, and soldiers who mistrusted every shadow. Still, Clara had thought that perhaps for a moment, they could exist untouched, unthreatened by the chaos beyond the canyon walls. She was wrong. It was a late afternoon when the riders appeared on the ridge above Red Hollow. Greyhawk was the first to notice them. 6 mounted figures in blue uniforms, rifles glinting in the sun. He crouched low, scanning the horizon with sharp black eyes. Clara, sensing the change in his posture, instinctively pulled her children closer. "Soldiers," she whispered, though it wasn't really a question. Greyhawk's expression was grim. "Yes," he said, "and they do not come for conversation." The patrol was led by a man Clara knew, though she hadn't seen him in years, Captain Harlan, a hard-eyed officer once affiliated with her late husband's railroad company. His uniform was clean, his hat tilted with authority, and his face carried the permanent curl of distrust that comes to men who have spent their lives commanding others. He spurred his horse forward, pointing at Greyhawk. "You there, Apache?" Harlan's voice cut through the canyon like a whip. "You are under suspicion for theft and harboring white fugitives. Surrender now or we fire." Clara stepped forward instinctively, her skirts whipping in the wind. "They're not fugitives," she shouted, voice cracking with urgency. "They've done nothing wrong." "You have to believe me," Harlan sneered, dismounting. "And why should I believe a white woman consorting with a savage? Your kind often forgets which side they're on." Greyhawk's jaw tightened. He stepped forward slowly, hands visible, a picture of measured calm. "I have harmed no one," he said, voice low and steady. "We are a family. Leave us in peace, family." Harlan laughed, bitter and sharp. "Family doesn't excuse theft." Clara's children clutched at her skirts. The air was thick with tension, rifles gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Every instinct in Clara screamed to run, but where would she go? Behind them, the canyon walls offered little concealment. Ahead, open plains meant death, and yet she stood firm, placing herself between Greyhawk and Harlan. "You'll have to shoot through me first," she said, voice trembling but determined. "They've done nothing." Harlan froze for a moment, studying her. Her defiance startled him, but it did not temper his resolve. "Step aside, woman, or I will—" "No!" Clara shouted, the word tearing through her like a whip. "You will not touch him. Not my children, not him." The moment seemed to stretch into eternity. Greyhawk, silent until now, raised a hand and motioned for the children to move behind the rocks. He was calm, a predator coiled for strike but restrained by an unspoken code. Clara's heart pounded, fear and admiration twisting together in a knot that made her stomach ache. Then, as if sensing the fragility of the moment, Harlan's expression hardened. He raised his rifle. Clara felt the heat of panic rise to her throat. Greyhawk's hand rested lightly on his bow. Arrow knocked, his gaze locked on the captain. And then the miracle, or the gamble, happened. Greyhawk spoke, voice calm but filled with authority. "You have no cause to fire. You do not understand this land or its people. Leave and we will suffer no harm." Harlan's eyes narrowed. He was a man of pride, a man of orders, but he paused. For reasons Clara could not understand, he lowered the rifle slightly. It was Clara who finally broke the tension. "You will not shoot." "I will not let you." "You are too late to take revenge. He saved my children's lives and my life as well." Greyhawk turned to her then, his expression unreadable. "You risked yourself for me." "I wasn't going to lose another man I cared about," she whispered before she could stop herself. Greyhawk's dark eyes softened, searching hers as if weighing the truth of her words. He stepped closer, the fire of the canyon reflecting in his eyes. The space between them hummed with unspoken truths. "You care about me?" he asked, low and uncertain. Clara's voice was barely audible, trembling under the weight of her own admission. "Too much." Greyhawk's hand lifted slowly, brushing her cheek with a touch as light and deliberate as the wind on the cliffs. The tension, the danger, the fear, they all melted into a moment suspended in the canyon's amber light. And then he leaned down, pressing his lips gently to hers. A kiss that was part promise, part question, part defiance of a world that had tried to keep them apart. Harlan watched, his expression a mixture of disbelief and irritation, and finally shook his head, muttering something under his breath before mounting his horse. "We'll return," he warned. and the law will be enforced. As the soldiers rode off, leaving dust and echo behind, Clara sank to the ground beside Greyhawk. The children emerged from their hiding spots, eyes wide but trusting once more. Clara's hands shook as she gathered them close, feeling their small bodies press against hers. Greyhawk knelt beside her, his arm wrapping protectively around her shoulders. "This land tests us," he said quietly, "but it will not break us." Clara's heart ached, not from fear, but from the intensity of what she felt for him. She realized as she looked at Greyhawk that love in this land was not gentle. It was not soft or delicate. It was raw, fierce, and as unforgiving as the desert itself, and yet it was undeniable. The children, sensing the shift in the air, laughed and began to play along the edge of the canyon. Their laughter was a balm, a reminder of why she fought, why she survived, why she dared to hope. Night came with a pale moon rising over Red Hollow, casting silver light across the canyon walls. Clara sat close to Greyhawk, her body brushing against his, the warmth of the fire mirrored in her chest. "You saved us all," she whispered, the words almost lost in the quiet of the night. "I saved no one," he said softly. "We saved each other. That is how this land works, by those who stand together." Clara leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream that a future existed, a future where they could face danger together and perhaps find happiness in the midst of hardship. And as the canyon breathed around them, the rustle of leaves, the trickle of the stream, the distant call of a hawk, Clara understood the truth of Greyhawk's world. Love was not given freely. It had to be claimed, protected, and nurtured, even in the face of bullets and suspicion. In that moment, under the vast Arizona sky, Clara and Greyhawk were more than a woman and an Apache warrior. They were a family bound by trust, courage, and the fragile but unbreakable spark of the human heart. The canyon was no longer merely a place of refuge. It had become a crucible, forging bonds stronger than fear, deeper than loss, and more enduring than the unforgiving land that stretched endlessly around them. And somewhere in the quiet of that night, Clara whispered a prayer, not for safety, not for deliverance, but for the strength to keep the fragile, blazing love she felt alive against all odds. Spring had arrived in Red Hollow Canyon, though the air remained crisp and the land unforgiving. Wildflowers clung stubbornly to cracks in the red rocks, and the stream that wound through the canyon glistened like liquid silver under the early sun. For Clara and her children, life had taken a fragile rhythm, one of survival, laughter, and quiet evenings around the fire. Greyhawk had become not just a protector, but the anchor that gave them the courage to hope again. Yet peace in the Arizona territory was always temporary. Word traveled fast, as it does in a land where rumor is as valuable as water. Traders, miners, and settlers spoke in hushed tones of soldiers cracking down on Apache activity and the disappearance of livestock from neighboring valleys. The fragile calm of Red Hollow was a candle flickering against an unforgiving wind. One afternoon, Greyhawk returned from scouting the outskirts of the canyon with a tense expression. Clara noticed it immediately. His eyes, usually so steady and calm, were narrowed, scanning the horizon with a predator's awareness. "There are soldiers," he said simply, his voice low. "Many, they move fast." "They have orders." Clara's stomach sank. She had hoped that his careful guidance, his knowledge of the land, could keep them hidden indefinitely, but some dangers could not be outrun, no matter how clever or strong one might be. "They're coming for us?" she asked, clutching Samuel's arm. Greyhawk shook his head. "They do not know us yet. They will think I am alone. I will draw them away." The words hit her like a whip. "You're not coming with us?" Her voice trembled with disbelief and rising panic. "You're leaving us?" "I must," he replied, his jaw firm, his dark eyes resolute. "If I lead them away, you will have time. I owe you that, you and your children. Your lives are more important than my own safety." Clara felt the tears welling in her eyes. She had never known fear like this, the sharp edge of losing a man she had come to love, the anchor of their small family, to a world that tolerated no exceptions. "You don't owe me anything," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes," he said softly, almost with reverence, "I do. You have given me hope, Clara. You have given me a reason to care again, and I will not squander it." She wanted to argue, to scream, to fight, but she knew better. Greyhawk's decision was not a matter of negotiation. It was a calculated act of love. And love, she realized, sometimes required sacrifice. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Clara huddled with her children in the deepest recess of the canyon. They had packed only what they could carry: dried meat, blankets, and a few treasured items. She wrapped her arms around her children, whispering assurances she barely felt herself. Greyhawk approached once more before leaving. His horse, black as midnight, nickered softly. He knelt beside Clara, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Live," he said simply. "Protect them. And do not forget me." She pressed her hands to his chest, feeling the strength and warmth beneath his deerskin vest. "I will wait for you," she whispered. He placed a finger under her chin, lifting her gaze to his. "Do not wait. Live, grow, love again if you must. But remember me." And then he rode off, silent as the wind, disappearing into the red haze of the desert. Clara watched until the dust swallowed him, until nothing remained but the echo of hoofbeats and the whisper of the canyon. For 3 days, she led her children southward, following the hidden paths Greyhawk had taught them. They traveled through dry washes and dense groves, sleeping in shallow caves and under the sparse canopy of cottonwoods. The children grew quiet, sensing the absence of the man who had become the center of their small universe. Clara pressed on, driven by instinct, love, and the survival skills he had instilled in them. Finally, they reached the mission near the border. The priest, a kindly man with a patient face, welcomed them. "You are safe now," he said gently, taking Clara's hands in his. "Rest here, heal here. You are among friends." Clara nodded, tears burning her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to collapse, to let her body release the tension that had gripped it for days. Yet the joy of safety was hollow, tainted by the ache of absence. Greyhawk had saved them, yes, but at a cost she could scarcely bear to imagine. For weeks she waited. Every shadow of movement in the canyon beyond the mission set her heart racing. Every distant horse, every rumble of wagon wheels made her hope rise and then crumble. Her children adapted more quickly than she did. They laughed again, they played, they began to dream of a life where fear was not constant. But Clara could not fully join them. Every heartbeat carried the memory of Greyhawk, the feel of his hands, the strength in his voice, the calm in his presence. And then, one evening, as the mission bell tolled through the dying light, she saw a figure approaching. At first she thought it was another patrol, another soldier come to enforce the law and tear them from safety. But as the figure drew closer, dust kicking up around his boots, her heart stilled. It was him, Greyhawk, worn, bloodied, and exhausted, but alive. His horse stumbled into the shade of the mission trees and he dismounted, brushing dust from his shoulders. His dark eyes met hers, and in them, she saw relief, triumph, and something more, a quiet, profound love that had endured every trial. Clara ran to him, sobbing, the children trailing behind, shouting his name. She threw herself into his arms, pressing her face against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her hands. "You're alive," she whispered. "You're really alive." Greyhawk held her tight, his cheek brushing against her hair. "I promised I would return," he said softly, "and I always keep my word." The children climbed onto his knees, laughing and shouting, their small hands tugging at his clothes, their joy raw and uncontained. He lifted them one by one, spinning them around in a circle, and Clara laughed through her tears, the sound mingling with the bells of the mission. "You said you had room for 8, she said, her voice trembling with joy and disbelief. Greyhawk's grin spread slowly, wide and unguarded, the sunlight catching the edges of his braids. "Then let's start building," he said, "and this time together." For the first time in years, Clara felt the weight of the world lift. She had survived loss, hardship, and the cruelty of a land that took more than it gave. But with Greyhawk by her side, with her children laughing and alive, she felt the stirrings of something impossible and glorious. Hope. The desert around them, harsh and unforgiving, seemed to soften. Red Hollow Canyon had taught them survival, endurance, and courage. But the mission and Greyhawk's return taught them something even more precious. Love could endure. Love could survive trials, fire, and the unforgiving stretch of the Arizona wilderness. That night, Clara and Greyhawk sat together by a small fire in the mission courtyard. The children slept inside, exhausted but safe. Greyhawk took her hand in his, roughened from work and riding, and held it gently. "You are brave," he said. "Stronger than I ever knew." "And you," Clara replied, her voice quiet but certain, "are more than I ever hoped for." I love you." His dark eyes softened. "And I love you, Clara. More than the canyon, more than the desert, more than life itself. I will never leave you again." The stars rose over the mission, bright and countless, as if the heavens themselves were blessing their union. The desert had tested them, but in the end it could not break them. Together they had endured fire, fear, and separation, and in doing so, they had forged a love stronger than anything the harsh Arizona territory could throw against them. And as Clara lay her head against Greyhawk's shoulder, the wind carrying whispers of the canyon beyond, she knew one truth with absolute certainty. Their family, this strange, wild, beautiful family of 6, would survive. And together they would thrive. Spring's golden light stretched across the Arizona territory, igniting the red rocks and canyons in a blaze of fire and warmth. Life at the mission had settled into a fragile rhythm. Clara's children ran and laughed freely, their hair streaked with sunlight, their cheeks rosy from exertion and happiness. For Clara, there was a calm that came with routine. Food cooked, clothes mended, small gardens tended, prayers said in the quiet hours of the morning. And yet, no matter the laughter, no matter the sunlight, her heart felt hollow. She would wake in the night and reach instinctively for Greyhawk, only to grasp empty air. The canyon had taken him from her for days, and though she had waited and prayed, fear had gnawed at her. She had begun to wonder if the desert, harsh and merciless, had claimed him forever. The children had grown curious about the man who had saved them. "Ma," Samuel asked one evening as they watched the sunset smear the sky with copper, "will Greyhawk come back?" Clara's heart clenched. I don't know, Sammy," she said softly, though deep down she refused to give up hope. "But I believe he will." Night fell, quiet except for the distant hoot of an owl and the murmur of the stream that ran past the mission. Clara sat outside, the youngest asleep in her lap, gazing at the horizon where Red Hollow's cliffs met the desert sky. She imagined Greyhawk riding through the dust and sun, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of his presence again. Then, as if summoned by her longing, a cloud of dust rose from the distant trail. Clara's breath caught in her throat. A lone rider approached, riding slowly but steadily, every movement deliberate. Her heart leapt. Could it be? Could it actually be him? The figure grew clearer. The silhouette of a tall man in buckskin, his hair braided, his posture as calm and commanding as she remembered. The horse stumbled slightly over a rock and he leaned forward, brushing dust from his shoulders. It was Greyhawk. Clara's legs gave way beneath her, and she ran, tears streaming down her cheeks, calling his name. The children, awakened by her cries, ran after her, shouting, laughing, hope spilling from them in waves. He dismounted, his eyes scanning the mission grounds, and then they met hers. There was no need for words. The ache of separation, the fear, the longing, all dissolved in that moment of recognition. Clara threw herself into his arms, sobbing, burying her face against his chest. "You're alive," she whispered. "You really came back." Greyhawk held her close, pressing his cheek against her hair. "I promised I would return," he said, voice low but firm. "And I always keep my word." The children surrounded him, climbing onto his legs and arms, their laughter filling the mission courtyard. Greyhawk lifted each one with practiced strength, spinning them around, catching their cries of delight. Clara watched, tears mingling with laughter, her heart swelling in a way she hadn't known was possible. "You said you had room for 8, she said breathlessly, her voice full of both joy and disbelief. Greyhawk grinned, the sun catching the edges of his braids. "Then let's start building, Mrs. Beaumont," he said. "This time together." Clara laughed through her tears. "Greyhawk. Greyhawk," she called, shaking her head in disbelief. "I thought I'd never see you again. And I thought I might die trying to reach you," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with fatigue. "But I could not leave you, nor these children alone in the world." The desert had been cruel, relentless, and harsh. He had endured days of pursuit, hunger, and danger, all for the sake of a woman and her children he barely knew at first. But by the time the mission bell had tolled, he had come to see them as his family. Their lives, their laughter, their hope, it was worth any risk, any trial. That night, as the children slept in their small beds at the mission, Clara and Greyhawk sat outside under a sky teeming with stars. The fire crackled between them, its warmth mingling with the cool desert air. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her hand. "You risked everything," she whispered. "Why?" Greyhawk turned slightly, lifting her chin to meet his gaze. "Because I could not let you go. Because I have found in you something I thought I had lost long ago. Hope and love." Clara's breath caught. "Love?" she repeated softly, almost in disbelief. He nodded, dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes, love. Fierce and stubborn like this land. It is not gentle. It is not easy. But it is worth it." For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to truly feel. Love, raw, unyielding, and full of danger, filled her heart to the brim. She pressed her lips to his, a kiss that was part gratitude, part longing, and part surrender. In the quiet of the night, under the stars and the watchful gaze of the desert, they spoke softly of the future, a home to build, a life to nurture, and children to raise, not in fear, but in the safety of love and trust. Greyhawk spoke of returning to Red Hollow Canyon to reclaim the land they had fled, to make it a sanctuary not just for them, but for anyone seeking refuge from the harshness of the world. Clara smiled, knowing that the canyon would forever carry the memory of their trials, their laughter, and the forging of their bond. Days turned to weeks. Together they worked alongside the mission, helping other families, tending gardens, and sharing knowledge of the land. The children flourished, their laughter no longer tempered by fear. Clara found herself laughing again, freely and without hesitation, and in every smile she saw the reflection of Greyhawk's steady, enduring presence. He had returned. He had fought against impossible odds, and in doing so he had made a promise not only to her, but to their new family, to the life they would now build together. In the heart of the Arizona Territory, against the backdrop of red cliffs and endless sky, a widow and her 4 children had found a protector, a companion, and a love that defied the cruelty of the world. And as Clara held Greyhawk's hand, watching her children play under the golden light, she realized something profound and unshakable. The desert had tested them, had tried to break them with fire, fear, and separation, but it had failed. Because love, like the canyon itself, could endure. Love, like Greyhawk, could return against all odds. The mission bells tolled once more in the fading light, a soft echo of peace and hope. And Clara, smiling through tears, whispered, "We are home now." Greyhawk pressed his lips to her forehead, the heat of the fire mirrored in his dark eyes. "Yes, Clara. At last we are home, and together, with their children laughing around them and the vast Arizona sky stretching endlessly above, they faced the future not as a widow and a warrior, but as a family forged in trials, sustained by love, and unbreakable against the harshness of the world. The desert could rage, storms could come, and life could test them again, but they had each other. And in that truth they had everything.